Welcome to episode 67, which is actually special to me. It's my birth year, so I'm going to date myself age-wise of the G2 on 5G. It's the latest inside scoop on everything 5G. We cover 6 topics in about 15 minutes, and it's brought to you by More Insights and Strategy. I'm Will Townsend, and joining me again this week is fellow analyst Anshel and Will. Let's get started with my first topic. And this week, Dell Technologies reported that it has posted several Open RAN wins in the European Union. But the question is, can these really materially impact 5G deployment? So right now, Vodafone is the only production win, and it was for COTS or common off-the-shelf server platforms. But as I've mentioned on prior podcasts, Dell has a reinvigorated telecom focus with some management changes and resource dedication to it as well. But I think this sort of points to what Dell's really good at and providing IT infrastructure building blocks. Now, in addition to the Vodafone win, there are also other wins, but they're more proof of concept. And I've talked to this point as well, beyond, greenfield deployments, which are quite obvious when you look at Rakuten Mobile in Japan, obviously Dish in the US, and likely Reliance, Geo in India. I think that's where Open RAN is really going to have an impact from my perspective. I mean, honestly, operators have made commitments in the RAN months, if not years ago. And so, from my perspective, Open RAN is likely going to have a greater impact on 6G in general, but would love to get your input on this as well, buddy.
Yeah, I think it's a big deal for Dell, obviously, because they've been trying for quite some time to get some momentum. I think one thing to consider is that they have not let up on their ORAN efforts, and they want to be a big player in the space, and they don't want to lose relevance or, necessarily be a tier 2 player. I think they want to be considered a tier 1, but I don't think they're at that point yet. And I think this is kind of on the way for them to be considered a serious player, right? Like when Samsung entered the market, nobody really considered them a serious player, but now I think everyone considers them a tier 1 player. So I think this is kind of a step on Dell's journey to being considered a tier 1.
Yeah, and I believe if you kind of look at kind of the traditional PC vendors, IT server vendors, IT infrastructure vendors, HPE, I mean, they're leading this space. I mean, they have the most mature telco group. They're publishing blueprints. They do have server platforms that are NEB certified and that sort of thing. But I view Dell as a second fast follower, with Lenovo still building their telecom group, seeing mainly proof of concepts out of Lenovo. They did have an event this week that I was not able to attend, so I didn't get any relevant updates there. But I agree with you. I mean, Dell's they're putting the right resources in place to make a real run at this. So we will definitely keep tabs on what's going on and report back in the future. But let's move to your first topic this week. And the big news, obviously, that everyone's been talking about is the iPhone 13 launch with Apple, and you wanted to provide some perspective on that because you actually attended the virtual event, right?
Yeah, so iPhone 13 launched this week, and there was a lot of news. There were multiple models announced, but what's interesting is that there was a lot of 5G related news specifically for the iPhone 13, because first of all, you didn't have mmWave on any models other than the US model. And on top of that, there are 5 different versions of the iPhone for different markets. The new iPad mini that they announced does have 5G, but it does not have mmWave, which is consider. And then there are different models for the US, Canada, Japan, global, China, Hong Kong, Macau, and Russia. So there's technically 6 models that are going to be available for the iPhone in general. And then on top of that, there's more 5G bands being added with some of the new CBRS bands, as well as some of the mid-band bands, which were already supported. But the iPhone is probably going to be the phone that supports the most bands this year. But on top of that, there was some really aggressive carrier promotions that we saw coming from AT&T, Verizon, and T-Mobile. So initially, they had a certain set of deals, and then T-Mobile and AT&T came out with pretty aggressive deals, and Verizon updated theirs. So now, if you're on Verizon and you have I believe, any unlimited plan, or no, theirs is still tied to their top tier unlimited plans, but it would let you get a Pro for free, which didn't before. AT&T's deal on any unlimited plan will get you a Pro or a Mini for free, but if you want a Pro Max, then it's $99. And then if you want a regular iPhone 13, it's $99 as well. But that depends on whether you do a eligible trade-in and unlimited plan. So you still have to trade in your device with AT&T, but you can get it with any unlimited plan. With T-Mobile, to get your free iPhone, you have to have the top tier unlimited plan. So basically what you're seeing is all these operators are being very aggressive on the iPhone 13 in terms of trying to get them in people's hands. And what's interesting about T-Mobile's deal is actually they have a promotion where they're going to let you have a new iPhone every 2 years for eternity, as long as you keep trading in your iPhone, which I think is a really interesting idea because that builds real strong brand loyalty, and it keeps people on the top tier plan, which is the most expensive, which increases ARPU. And it's seen as a promotion, so it doesn't necessarily get tracked separately from the revenue, even though it's chewing into the revenue because they're giving you money back for the phone. But I think, something that is unrelated but somewhat related, I think, was that T-Mobile's CFO talked about how they were having some issues with Samsung supplying enough devices.
I read that.
And T-Mobile is a very Samsung-heavy carrier compared to the others. So I think this promotion might be part of a way for them to diversify their user base a little bit away from Samsung, so that they don't struggle with, potentially not having enough devices for users when they come in and want to upgrade.
Yeah, it's interesting. If we think back to the original iPhone launch, right? AT&T in the U.S. was the launch partner with Apple there, and so that's a great observation with T-Mobile and Android as well. But I think the net effect of this is, not only from an ARPU perspective, right? I think that's clever, but with these aggressive promotions, they're trying to move, some older generation non-5G enabled, iPhone users into the 5G world, and obviously that's going to help with sunsetting 3G networks and that sort of thing. So I think it's got these promotions have multiple benefits to the carriers, longer term down the road. But certainly, it's interesting to see Apple really hopping on the 5G bandwagon. But one of the interesting things that I heard from some other colleagues is that there wasn't really a lot of talk about 5G, right, during the Apple announcement.
There was a little bit. It was kind of an afterthought. But I think that it was intentional by Apple because they're trying to downplay the role of 5G in selling the iPhone 12, even though I actually think it was a very big factor. And also, I think, the iPhone 13 in general, it does have some performance boosts. on the GPU side, especially. But
Mhm.
overall, I think the user experience will not be that different from the iPhone 12.
Yeah.
So I think the operators are looking for a way to boost sales because I don't think this phone has much hype around it, in my opinion.
Yeah. Right.
And the other thing I wanted to correct was AT&T's update to their deal was that all three versions of the iPhone are available for free,
Okay.
which was not the case when they started their promotion.
Yeah.
So now basically all operators are offering some version of the iPhone 13 for free, and then some of them are offering pro models like AT&T is for free as well,
Yeah.
while others are charging a little bit more for it. But either way, you can get an iPhone 3 for 13 basically for free at any carrier. What's interesting is it's not just for new customers, it's also for existing customers. And that's why I think that these carriers are trying to prevent churn because,
Mhm.
if they only do it for new customers, they're churning each other's customers
Yeah.
to get new iPhones. And by offering their customers to stay, I can say for a fact that I have a couple friends that were like, if they don't offer it for existing customers, I'm leaving to somebody else. So,
Yeah.
I think that's a part of it. So I think we're going to see less churn, actually. I think because, why would you switch carriers if they're going to offer it to you as well?
Yeah, that's a great insight. I didn't even really kind of factor that one. So good stuff, man. Well, let's move to my second topic this week, and I want to talk about U.S. Cellular. So U.S. Cellular is considered, the fourth, largest carrier behind, T-Mobile, AT&T, and Verizon, and we'll see how Dish, ramps their 5G network. But they primarily serve rural America. And so this week, they announced that they have chosen Nokia for their 5G SA core. And this win builds upon prior RAN trials with mmWave and Qualcomm. This announcement, though, also highlighted that Samsung Networks, as well as Ericsson, is going to get a piece of the RAN business as well. So they're really spreading, that RAN share among three infrastructure providers. But I wasn't aware until this announcement of the prior trials with millimeter wave. And what's interesting, it's Nokia AirScale, and they're also leveraging some of Nokia's capabilities with fixed wireless access to help sort of bridge, these connectivity gaps in rural America. And I've spoken to FWA in the past on prior podcasts as, it's a key linchpin consideration element in the overall, kind of bridging the digital divide, as is, low Earth orbit, satellite connectivity and that sort of thing. So I'm wondering, do you have any insight there?
I think this is a natural win for Nokia because I've been covering a lot of their millimeter wave trials with Qualcomm, and it's been both them and Ericsson have been doing a lot of trials. I think the most recent one was actually an Ericsson trial on the millimeter wave side,
Right.
but Nokia does have a lot of experience in there as well. And yeah, I think building a SA core is important for new use cases. So it was an inevitability that US Cellular would choose somebody for their SA core.
Yeah.
It's good to see that Nokia is getting a win here, even though US Cellular is by size much smaller than the big three.
Right. Yeah. No, I agree. I think this is a great win for Nokia, and it points to their success under new leadership and sort of turning that ship around. And they've traditionally been very strong in RAN, and so but certainly U.S. Cellular is wanting to kind of spread that probably for continuity of supply, amongst three major infrastructure providers. But we'll keep tabs on this and report back as things develop. Let's move to your second topic this week, and you want to talk about it's a Spectrum auction, right? That's coming up.
Yeah, so there's a new Spectrum auction that we've been talking about for the last few months. This is the 3.45 to 3.55 gigahertz midband auction. So it's 100 megahertz of spectrum. And the people over at Light Reading have dubbed it the Andromeda auction. And they chose it mostly because of the TV show, and it's Auction 110 is the technical term for it. But Mike Dano over at Light Reading has been the one kind of driving this discussion, at least. But what's interesting is there's a lot of talk about what this auction might mean and how much it might cost, because if you look at who spent what money on the C-band auction, I think we would all agree that Verizon's most likely tapped out, and that most likely we're going to see a lot of bidding from AT&T, and that we'll probably see a lot of bidding from T-Mobile as well, but probably less so just because T-Mobile is already pretty spectrum rich at a lower band, which is good for them. But I think T-Mobile is also very aware that they don't want AT&T to get the spectrum too cheaply, and that they also want to have spectrum available to them in places where they might not have enough spectrum on 2.5, or where they might want to have access to more spectrum simply because they bid on the C-band as well and won some auctions there. So I expect that the big bidders will be AT&T, T-Mobile, and possibly Dish. But I'm still kind of questioning whether or not Dish will participate, simply because they haven't been participating in a lot of these auctions, even though they should be. Their lack of participation, in my opinion, has drawn some criticism, because there is a need for them to acquire their own spectrum. Otherwise, they're going to just be seen as another MVNO. So the one analysis that I saw out there says that they might AT&T might acquire the maximum of 40 megahertz. So there is a maximum allowed allotment for somebody to acquire out of this 100 megahertz, because in the C-band auction, Verizon acquired, I believe, 100 megahertz of spectrum themselves. In total, and so did AT&T. So there's lots of questions whether or not AT&T will go for the full 40 megahertz. But I think T-Mobile and AT&T are going to be the biggest bidders here.
Yeah, I would agree with you. I think AT&T will probably come out of this with the biggest position, but it'll be interesting to see how it all unwinds, and I'm sure we'll talk about it on a future podcast. But let me move to my third and final topic this week, and I want to talk about Telefonica. I've been somewhat critical of European carriers in the past, focusing on just 5G deployment and all you can eat, unlimited plans, and not really focusing on discrete 5G services and that sort of thing. So I was encouraged this week when Telefonica announced that it's partnering with a Spanish venture capital company to fund a disruptive technology allotment that's tied to 5G, IoT, and AI. I expect Edge will be, a consideration there as well. And, the goal is to raise up to 250 million euros. And, the real question is, can this, facilitate, meaningful new use cases and services? And I believe it can. When you look at what, we never want to be, regional, focused, but we both live in the U.S. and so we're very close to the three tier ones. All of them have demonstrated commitments to proof of concept labs and those sorts of things to bring, startups and those sorts of companies, into these labs, fund the technology. And we're seeing, from AT&T and Verizon, a lot of very innovative use cases around just in general, factory automation, public safety, and that sort of thing. So I think this is a great step forward. I mean, we've seen, Deutsche Telekom do some similar things in Germany, but this number really wowed me. 250 million euros is quite a bit of money, and certainly I expect that part of Telefonica's investment is to actually monetize some of these services as well. When I talk to the Verizons and AT&Ts of the world, it seems like it's more altruistic. They sort of look at that activity as an enabler to drive sort of adoption reduce churn and that sort of thing. But this could really move the needle. So I'm wanting to get your perspective on it as well.
I think, in Europe, a lot of these things are generally run by the government. The government does a lot of investment. The government does a lot of, um, seed funding for projects. So it's nice when you see European companies investing in these things. And they tend to be pretty efficient with their money. There isn't much waste. And honestly, it's a very different structure in Europe than there is in the US because of, the government aspect of things. But I do think that it helps when there's more funding from the private sector as well. And Telefonica is a fairly large company. They do about $40 billion a year in revenue. I think they might even be doing more. It might even be 50 or 60 at this point. I think it's 40 billion euros. So we're looking like $60 billion a year. And realistically, they're profitable. They can throw a couple $100 million into a VC fund to facilitate 5G and IoT capabilities, especially when those things, being used on their network. Because Telefonica, they're not just present in Spain, right? They have different ownerships across South America, and they are overall, a very large operator. They own Movistar, O2, Telefonica Brazil, so they're all over the place. So I think this is a net positive for them, and they're a very profitable company. I think in 2020 they made $6.5 billion. So they're not hurting, and I think Telefonica, you and I would both agree, is a very proactive and innovative operator in Europe compared to what we've seen in other places. So it's been a while since I've been to Spain, and I haven't had a chance to try their 5G network, but ironically enough, my mom is there right now, and I told her to use Movistar. So I'm hoping to see this kind of spark some innovation and growth for them in 5G.
Yeah, I love it. Putting your mom to work for you. That's awesome. I'll just make one final comment. I was impressed with Telefonica, during the height of COVID. They proactively launched a set of, kind of online, resources that folks could access. It was very educational. It spanned grade school through, skill up, opportunities. And they did that at, there was no additional charge for its subscriber base to do that. So this just points to another very, proactive, innovative, thought process on the part of Telefonica.
I was going to add to that. So I recently read an article about how I think it's Valencia, a region in Spain, is literally one of the lowest COVID rates in the world. And part of the reason why is because they're using data scientists and AI to use predictive measures based on real-time COVID situations to preemptively ratchet restrictions up and down in places as they're needed. And they partnered with Telefonica to be able to track people and being able to understand their movements and who they've interacted with, which might not fly in the US, but it works. And some of the people that are part of this project previously worked for Telefonica. So there's a very strong culture of innovation and proactiveness that you're seeing coming out of the Telefonica culture. So it's really cool.
Yeah, great insight, bud. All right, man. Let's move to your third and final topic this week. You want to talk about Dish, and it sounds like they're preparing to test some of their low band spectrum, right?
Yeah, so they are looking to test some of their 600 megahertz spectrum, which during COVID they were actually leasing out to T-Mobile to expand their bandwidth capabilities during the pandemic when everybody was stuck at home. But now they're talking to the FCC asking to test carrier aggregation of 600 megahertz in non-contiguous blocks. So they want to aggregate their 600 megahertz spectrum together in a way to allow for more bandwidth, but also at the same time still have great coverage because 600 megahertz has the best coverage characteristics of any band we have in the US.
Sure.
And they are looking to do this in Denver and Las Vegas, which makes sense since Las Vegas is one of their launch markets, and Denver because, well, I think Denver is their home base, isn't it?
Yeah, they're headquartered in Boulder, I believe.
Yeah.
But you're right.
So, the reality is that it looks like they're getting ready to launch, and it looks like they want to build a good coverage base with 600, which I think makes total sense because it's kind of a replication of T-Mobile's strategy.
Yeah, it is. And what I like about their focus on it, Las Vegas makes sense, right? T-Mobile has, a very impressive footprint and deployment there. And, given, some of the things that T-Mobile had to do to get the Sprint deal done, there were, concessions and spectrum sharing and other things, with Dish there. But what I also like about the Colorado market, their home market, is that right now AT&T doesn't have its 5G footprint deployed there. Now that's obviously going to change over time, but I think those are two great markets for them to really focus on. So yeah, well, hey buddy, it was another great podcast this week. Why don't you take us home?
Absolutely. We hope our listeners and viewers found this week's topics interesting. If anyone out there would like to provide us insights on a future 5G topic for a future podcast, please reach out to us on social media. Will is at Willtown Tech and I'm at Anshel Sog. We hope you have a great weekend and please tune in again next week.